This week, I've decided we are going to call it the floated pass that's in the air slightly too long and allows the winger time to catch up, even though it looked like it should have been a try-scoring chance show.
Okay, yeah. I'm in favour of that. Then in future, there can be the one where it's the 13 doesn't throw the pass because they know if they do, it'll be floated in the air slightly too long and it'll give the winger time to catch up, even though it looks like a clear 2v1 show. So that can be next week's title.
That's next week's show. Yeah. Although it might change when we get there.
Who knows? We don't know what the next rugby's going to be.
The state of international rugby is changing all the gosh darned time.
My goodness.
So we had about 400 games last week. I think we had about 380 this week.
Yeah.
We have been through an awful lot of them. I watched virtually all of them over the weekend.
Yeah, I've had to catch up because I was playing on Saturday. I was playing rugby. We won. We got a bonus point win away from home against a sort of local rival within the context of the league.
Superb news. That's fantastic. We're not going to talk about it anymore than that. Because there is so much international rugby to
say
get
well
through.
done in the comments anyway. Thank you.
Yeah. And we're going to begin with Scotland v Portugal.
Yes.
As the Tier 1, the Autumn Nation Series, for the elitists out there, would have you believe the weekend began. Or certainly Saturday began. So Scotland, heavily changed team. Portugal, fairly strong team.
Yeah.
And it was, I think it's a scoreline that really reflected the game. You know, you had Portugal really putting up a fight and they were worthy of a few tries. They had some really good, really fun moments over the course of the full game. And I'm glad they got the tries on the board to reflect it. But ultimately, Scotland were a much better team.
Yeah. Scotland showed kind of what they've got in attack. And
Yeah.
I think they were worth the 50-odd points they scored in the end. That, you know, if you're opening up an opposition like that, you do deserve to score the 50-odd points. Portugal had all their stars playing, or the majority of them at least, and stayed in the fight as long as they could. I think, you know, when they got to the point where, like, Sammy Marks took that try where they were dominating the pack, they were dominating at scrum time, which is really great to see. But again, Scotland, particularly in the back line, really let rip. I think, again, just watching Darcy Graham play rugby is one of the biggest joys that exists, where every single try, he doesn't score just a normal try, does he?
No, they're all magic.
He only scores one where you're like, oh, he's ridiculous. Like, how does he do that?
And even when it's him dotting it down in the corner, it's always someone else has just done something magical. Yeah. And he's popped up on the shoulder at the perfect time. Yeah. You know, it's brilliant.
And I'm really like they've got him and Aaron Reid as options on the wings now. This is his second cap for Scotland, I want to say.
Second or third.
Yeah, and he's scoring tries. Like, he looks like international rugby is not a problem for him, you know. And I know that he's not yet played against
it's Canada and it's Portugal.
Sure.
And, you know.
Like, he's not played against the top tier of defences yet. But I just get the vibe of him that if somebody gets injured in the Six Nations, he just won't have an issue. He's going to just play well.
And that's what these games are good for, isn't it? You know, we talked about it a bit last week, but just building these players up so that they can slot in seamlessly. Yeah. It's the thing France have done incredibly well, and South Africa are doing incredibly well at the minute, is giving those players chances in smaller games. So if they do need to step up, if they do have an injury or an illness somewhere, they can pull these players in and they slot in. Yeah. And Scotland looked cohesive, they looked together. They didn't look like an enormously changed team from last week. They didn't look like they've gone, you know, sort of 8 or 9 changes every week this autumn, as they have. They just looked cohesive and together. And that was a performance of pretty much nothing but positives for Scotland. Sure. You know, I think you can make an argument about that second half, the Portuguese pack getting on top. However, those are still things we knew from last week. You know, Elliot Miller had a torrid time against Springboks. Turns out he's also had a torrid time against Portugal. You've maybe got to look at it and go like, okay, what's the connection here?
Sure.
You know,
I mean, Francisco Fernandez is a better loosehead prop than Oxenche.
But this is the other interesting thing, I think, is one of the things I really liked about Portugal is Simon Mannix has come in as the head coach, which as two people that watched the 2007 World Cup back last year, he had some interesting thoughts on Portugal at the time, and yet his atmosphere and the way he's talked about Portugal has been incredibly different, you know, since he's come in. But the thing he's really brought, I think, is the thing they needed, which is just boldness, you know? And to make that call where they've won one scrum penalty, right, and it's quite a tight scrum penalty, it's quite a technical scrum penalty on the 5 metre line, and then he replaces the entire front row for the second scrum. And no one does that because you don't want to take the momentum away from them.
Yeah, you know? Yeah.
But he brings on the full new front row, and they go, no, and they turn a technical offence into just like complete domination. And, you know, Mark scores off the back of that.
Strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
While the opposition are tired.
And that is the kind of leadership and management Portugal need.
Yeah.
I think they look like they're moving in the right direction. It feels a bit like a step back after the way they stood up to Wales and Australia last year. But also, they're not going to be at that level, right? They don't have the World Cup together. They don't have the conditioning. They haven't had the time together in the same way.
They're a big game team, if that makes sense as well, which I know is a kind of bullshit excuse for them.
And they are missing players, and there are younger players coming through. The Marta, Germano Portea has taken a year's sabbatical from rugby post-World Cup. And those, the few of those players will come back in, and then a bunch of those younger players will grow over the next few years. And Portugal just needs to be regularly playing these games. And the biggest positive for them this year is the fact they had games against here Scotland and one against South Africa. And they've had, for the first time outside World Cup year ever, 2 chances to play the best teams in the world.
Yeah.
Right? And their goal is to step up and be the 7th, and then beyond that, into the 4th, 3rd best European team.
Yeah.
And to start contesting for quarterfinals and pushing for Six Nations spots potentially. And I think they continue to be on that track, even though a scoreline of a 30-point difference might not look it. Sure. I think ultimately that was a game in which both teams should come out going, no, that was okay. Portugal could have pushed harder. I don't think they should be ecstatic about the result. I think there's moments of their defence where they switched off, and things like the intercept try and charge down, which
the intercept try was funny.
Yeah, but that easily, you can easily chalk those off and go, okay, that's our own errors. You can take those points out in a different day.
I think it's one of those where it's like if you drop, let's say, a scrum half or a fly half or an inside centre or whatever into international rugby. It will take them a long time playing against people of that level for them to get used to it, right? It's like that with the whole team, They've shown that they can compete with Tier 1 international teams, having not really had that exposure before. It's just a case of experience and confidence for them. But as a unit, it's exposure to that level.
You've then got to make sure every individual player in your first choice 23 is up to that standard, And having had some retirements, some injuries, and some players unavailable, you then have to do that again. And you have to build a squad. And it's a really, really difficult task to do. And Portugal are doing it much faster than, Chile are also moving at some lick. But this Portuguese squad might be the fastest anyone's ever got up to this standard, in which they're regularly competing and standing
That's
up.
why they took everyone by surprise in the World Cup,
Yeah.
Last point I want to make on Scotland. I don't think anything can show you how far Scotland have come. Like the fact that I look at Rory Hutchison, right? And I see a player who 10, 15 years ago would have been the one player in the backline that Scotland rely on. And now he doesn't make their starting 15. That you're looking at Hugh Jones and Sione Tuipulotu as their starting centres. Chris Harris has been up there for ages. And Stafford McDowell's really stepped up well. They've got Moses Tuipulotu coming through. Where does Hutchison fit into all of this? But again, they would have been so reliant on him in the back line a few years ago. And now he doesn't even get into the team.
So, should we move along?
Yes.
Shall we look at Romania, Canada?
Let's do it. I'm not too interested today in doing the whole feeling sorry for Canada.
We've talked about Canada a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I think that my overriding feeling from a Canadian point of view on this game was, wasn't it brilliant to see them stand up and properly fight,
Yeah.
And then you go, no, they still lost by more than a score to a team that they should be beating, or would have been beating, pre-Kingsley Jones. And it's all a shame, it's all hope, but they beat earlier in the year, and Romania were the better team for pretty much the entire game.
Yeah.
And just because Canada stood up and when they had chances they took them, that feels like such an improvement that you're like, this is great to see Canada standing up and fighting, and someone other than Lucas Rumble being exceptional. And,
sure.
They got a very lucky penalty try decision their way, where Quatrin breaks off, having been driven backwards. The entire Canadian maul is going backwards. Quatrin breaks off himself, sneaks down the blind side, and as you're seeing here, no doubt, is just tackled normally, and it's given as a penalty try. And it's very lucky, and without that, the scoreline might have been, I think, a better reflection of the game. But Romania, I think, are the story of this game. Once again, we talked last week about how good it is to see them with a proper identity, right? And we'll no doubt cover this on the main channel down the line, but one of, quietly, the best appointments, best bits of, high up rugby boardroom work that anyone's pulled off over the last few years is Romania, last year, managing to poach David Gerard, the former, one-cap French international in the 90s. Then
that's all you need to know.
Yeah, became a coach, coached at Stade, coached around the top 14, pretty much made his name with Portugal, where he was assistant to Patrice Lagisquet last year and was expected to take over as head coach when Lagisquet left. However, Romania got in there first, while Lagisquet was still going back and forth about whether he retires or whether he doesn't, and managed to poach him, managed to steal him, and get him in as their head coach. And what a job he's doing, because we're seeing Romania not only now play with that pack and they're looking much better with that, in the way he got the Portuguese pack working, to above their standard, really, or the standard expected of them. They have just been dominant both weeks so far. They've looked brilliant. There's, a couple of mauls in particular where they're driving like 20 metres downfield and they're completely smashing Canada, which is a huge step forward even from the summer when they played them, never mind, last year at the World Cup when they were pretty powder puff. And yet they've also added more of a backs game. Him being very, very French, they're playing in that kind of very French system where the forwards are playing one game and the backs are playing a different game entirely, and the two of them are kind of meshing together. And it's kind of wonderful to watch. Like, I'm really excited to watch Romania at the minute. They look fantastic.
It's kind of like tier 2 rugby, to use that phrase, is equivalent of the Tony Brown Springboks.
Yeah.
You think of Romania the last couple of years, you just think of the maul. You just think the maul is everything, right? Maul is life, right? And that still exists. That's still there. But again, especially this weekend, I was just so thrilled to see them opening up,
We think about the tries that Christy Sherricker has scored over the last few years, right? And they're all boshing over from 5 metres, or holding off 3 defenders. And then you look at the try he scored this weekend.
That's what I was about to bring up. Like, firstly, just Sherricker being back generally is brilliant, because I think that he is, for me, the star of this Romania team, along with Hinkley Valvassa, who we will talk about, no doubt. But yeah, Sherricker's try, Sherricker's try, which is on screen for you at the moment, fantastic. The kind of Tongan connection out wide of Valvassa and Manamua on the wing.
Was great.
Tavita Manamua is an absolute mountain of a guy. And yeah, Hinkley Valvassa, again, we spoke last week about what's his best role in this team, what's his best position, is it as a 10, is it a 13, is it fullback, wing, whatever, right? Turns out this week, it's just all of them. He'll just play them all at once, right? Whether he wants to crash, bosh, and then do the offload out the back, pass it early, his kicking game is fantastic. I just don't really see much of a weakness to this guy. He's just a general rugby player. As a pure bit of entertainment, I just love watching him play.
Yeah. It's so exciting to see Romania build this, And you look at Manamua's try, right? And it's so smart, both from Valvassa and from Romania in general, that they just congest the defence in other areas, They leave him on their own on this side. And then it means, in the moment they snap back outside, no one sees this coming. You think it's going to be a series of forward pick and tries because it's Romania, and that's the team they are. And then instead you think, it's going to the backs, it's going to be Valvassa doing something magical. No, they're just going to chuck it back to the one side you're not watching, to the enormous Tongan lad on the wing. And it is just like really smart, knowing their resources, knowing their reputation, and then expanding on it. And I think we're heading towards maybe the most exciting Rugby World Championship ever, with Portugal looking strong, with Georgia looking fantastic, as we'll get onto, and then with Romania looking reborn. And I'm just so excited about this Romania team.
Yeah, they are the dark horse. They've got so much excitement coming through that back line. As I say, there's Valvassa, Manamua you mentioned, Jason Tamani, Alan Conakey at 9.
Conakey's fantastic. Simonescu
at fullback. Like, there is so much to get excited about with this. And as I say, like, them using Sherricker as that edge forward to kind of like link up the forwards and the back line. Yeah. He's the only one who's playing both games. There's the backs game, there's the forwards game, and Sherricker is a part of both.
And that's phenomenal. Obviously, next year's Rugby World Championship also doubles for World Cup qualification, which is going to be hugely exciting because it means that this really matters, that there's 2.5 spots on the line for the Rugby World Cup, and none of these teams are qualified yet. Right? Yeah. So suddenly we've got that wide open.
Yeah. Should we, on that note, move on to Georgia?
Yes, I think we should.
As they played against Italy.
I think we should.
Now, this has become one of my favourite rivalries in international rugby. I don't think we ever considered it a rivalry until a couple of years ago when Georgia started calling out Italy saying, we want your spot in the Six Nations, or we at least want to be there alongside you. They obviously beat Italy a couple of years ago. That fantastic game with Teddy and Dadza scoring 2 tries. We're now at a point where this is Georgia's biggest game of the calendar every year. Not every year, but whenever they play.
It's the watch your mouth derby, isn't it?
Yes.
There's Georgia, who are very much like, the national sport of Georgia is wrestling, and it shows no time other than when they really want to play whoever is bottom in the Six Nations. Yes. So you saw them after the Six Nations this year calling out Wales on social media saying, come to Tbilisi and play us, you cowards. And they've done it with Italy repeatedly. I can't wait to see them try it for Ireland and with the other teams as they slowly move their way up.
And what's funny is as Italy have moved their way up the Six Nations, this has only become more of a grudge match for Georgia.
It's become the case with Italy. They're like, well, no, we're obviously better than you. So it becomes, we want to shut you up. We want to shut you down.
Yeah.
Richard Cockerell, pre-match, coming out and saying, if you disrespect us, we'll just beat you.
Yeah.
Which I loved as that statement of intent.
Not just him going, we're better than the worst team in the Six Nations. We're better than a load of the teams in the Six Nations is the statement that they're trying to make.
Yeah.
And I love that because it just piles the pressure onto Italy.
Yeah.
Italy know how big a game it is. And that is just genuine pressure on them. And they did look rattled for the first sort of 50 odd minutes of the game. I think that it eventually showed that Italy just were the better team, right? That in times in past, like particularly in the Kieran Crowley era, we've kind of criticised Italy for keeping the ball in hand too much, but I think in this game that was the perfect approach to take.
Yeah.
You know, that the more tackles they could get Georgia to make while they had possession, the more they could tire them out, because they knew that the pack that they had on the bench would be better than Georgia's.
I think when we talk about teams being tired out, what we tend to think about is them struggling to run at the breakdown, them not being as fast to get back and track back, them falling off tackles just through fatigue. But actually, I think the way in which it manifests itself for Georgia was that their accuracy dipped and their composure dipped and just their actual decision-making went down. You know, you make worse decisions under pressure, under, strain and when you're tired. And that was what showed, you know? You look at Georgia had 2 chances where they had lineouts late on where they could have gone on and won the game. And they fluffed both of them because they were knackered. Italy wore them down brilliantly, I thought, over the start of the second half. You know, you had that card period, which Georgia managed brilliantly. You know, they really run the clock down and they take their time over every scrum, every setting, everything they can. And then Italy eventually managed to score right at the death of it, right at the end of it. And it changes things there.
I think Italy was so supercharged in that.
Yeah.
That, as you say, like it was mainly kind of the brain fog factor, as you say. But I do think Italy's collision dominance got a little bit better as the game went on. That instead of falling off tackles, Georgia were just a little bit more passive in tackles. You know, they were conceding ground at the gain line, you know, rather than getting those dominant hits as they were getting earlier in the game. But in terms of standout performers, I think, first off, like, who knew that Matt Gallagher had a massive left boot on him like that when he kicked for touch? Who knew that it was that big a boot? I think that was really, really a positive for Italy. You know, he can play across the back three. That's something they really might want to consider as kind of their left-footed kicking option going forward. But in terms of Georgia, like... we have to discuss one of the emerging stars of world rugby, that is David Niniashvili.
He's a superstar.
He is.
He is as bright a star of rugby produced in a very long time. He is a huge, huge name within Georgia now, you know. There was a clip fairly recently of a kid crying, meeting him on his birthday.
Yes.
And that is the level he's at, you know. Like, within Georgian rugby, he is the first player like this they've ever produced.
Yeah.
Where he is a
Since Gogodze, at least.
But no, where he is a world-class running, like, highlights reel player, you know. The Gogodze and David Zirikashvili, also world-class. Like, they've produced 3 or 4 world-class players over their kind of 20 years in rugby. However, they haven't produced a player that is as marketable as this, you know?
That's very true.
A player who is as shining a highlights reel player who you can put on and you can show to a fan of football or of whatever other sport and go, look at this kid. And they go, oh, he's special.
And
oh,
he's 22 years old.
Yeah.
The last time they brought through a back kind of that young was Lobsonidze.
Yeah.
Right? And again, like, what a brilliant player.
We were talking about this during the game, right? Lobsonidze is at like 86 caps,
Yeah.
right? So he could genuinely beat Alan Wynne-Jones' record for most caps.
Yeah,
Possible.
definitely could. But the thing is, he came through as like a young game managing, like old head, young shoulders type player, rather than this highlights reel fullback, you know?
Akatabadzadze as well is a phenomenon, continues. The way his game is rounding out is really impressive as well. We saw him score another try at the weekend. I think his tracking line here is unbelievable.
It's class.
If you watch where he starts and where he adjusts into, just knowing where the defence is going to be and keeping an eye on the defender rather than just his teammate and the ball carrier, this is proper like world-class wing play. This is, you know, Chris Ashton was on the halftime coverage of this game in the UK, and that was the guy I was thinking of watching this, right? Like, Tabitsadze has for a long time been incredibly quick, and that stood out in Georgia because they produce a lot of big lads, but they haven't always had like the wheels to keep up. And then he comes along, and yet every single year he improves. Yeah. Like, he is, since when he first kind of came into the team sort of 4 or 5 years ago, maybe the most improved player in this team, you know? Yeah. He's now become a proper international winger, and his try-scoring record, right, in terms of tries per caps, is second only to Will Jordan if anyone's ever played 20 or more international games.
That's crazy.
Which is insane.
What I love about that tracking line there that you're on about is it's so easy when Lobsonidze kind of goes for the half break for him to run the line off that. But instead, he anticipates it goes through 3 or 4 pairs of hands before he's needed.
He waits, he bears his time and eventually times
How many
run.
times do you see somebody get in here and then you're kind of stuck in that scenario where it's like, oh, do I go for the try myself? Do I try and link up? Do I go for the offload over the head or something? He saves himself so much hassle by just biding his time and hitting it at the perfect opportunity. Because he's quick enough that he could just join this attack at any point. But he buys his time. It's fantastic.
And it's a superb
try.
At
that one skill, that's world class. And yes, what a try generally.
And because this becomes the other interesting thing about Georgia, right, is obviously, I think that Richard Cockrell is an absolutely perfect man for the job.
Yeah.
Anyone could have told you that, He probably looked at Georgia, he went over for the first time when he had the interview for the job and was like, wait, a whole country of people like me? Is this paradise? This is brilliant.
They're all bald and have beards.
I can headbutt any of them and they'll be up for it.
Yeah.
They'll love this. I thought once I left the ABC club, this was over for me. But no, he's clearly having the time of his life. He clearly loves this job, is the perfect fit for it. They clearly love him. They're really playing for him, really bought into the way he plays. However, the interesting thing I think has flown under the radar, right, is he poached Conor McPhillips, who is Bristol's former attack coach, right? And that really shows in moments like the Tabatsadze try, where the way he manages to get those players linking up and playing, and I said this 4 years ago, right, that we're witnessing the Argentinification of Georgia.
Yes.
Where they've been a big scrum team, they're now becoming a big offload team, and at some point they'll put those two together. And I think we're starting to see the move towards that, There was 1 or 2 huge scrums, but generally their scrum is fine now. But them having a guy who designs moves like this is really exciting, as well as a player like Niniashvili who can create the try that's eventually finished by Lobsonidze.
It's such an exciting time to watch Georgia and also Italy. The fact that they closed out that game, they're obviously a really exciting attacking team generally. But in this game, I think we had to see a bit more of the game management side of them.
That's the thing. I think from an Italian point of view, this was a really important game.
Yeah.
Because they need to learn to close these games out, And I think they were very vividly, very obviously, at a tier of intensity below their normal rate in the Six Nations.
Yeah.
And they just play better in the Six Nations. That's always been the case for Italy. They're better in the Six Nations than they are in World Cups, than they are in autumns, than they are in the summer. But we did see them close out a close game and also come from behind. This was Italy's biggest ever comeback from a half-time deficit.
10
which
points.
Is crazy. 11 points.
11 points.
11 points. Which is
I was doing
crazy
10
stat, they're
siblings,
barely
sorry.
there. But it shows that Italy teams of past have got behind and then just given up.
Yeah.
And gone, oh, it's not our day. It shows this team is not like that. There's a mentality shift there.
Yeah.
But there's also just the actual nous and knowledge to see it out, know how to grind this team down and how to win that game.
Yeah.
And when it comes to playing the likes of, Wales and Scotland and the teams in the Six Nations they can beat, they're going to need those skills. Potentially if they get into the last 10 minutes against France or England again, where they're in touch, they need this. And they need to be playing these games against teams slightly below them so they can learn to beat the teams that are slightly above them.
And bear in mind as well, they did this without Lamoureux. Bar the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
They did this without Capozzo. They did this without, let's say, Lewis Liner as well, as another high-profile name in that team. It's obviously a great squad that they had out, but again, this will only help them develop depth in terms of the Six Nations.
And likewise, Alessandro Garbisi playing 9, kind of shifting that about rather than Varney and Pasarello, who've typically shared the shirt more recently.
Yeah.
So it's really positive for Italy, even though the points in the first half where it really probably didn't feel it.
That game's always going to be a scary one, though. It's always going to be a shaky one where, they always will go on as the overdogs no matter what.
Yeah.
And Georgia will always take that personally. So, brilliant test match.
Superb.
But
Superb.
Do you know who I want to talk about next?
Who do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about Hong Kong and Brazil.
Oh, yes! This was a game of rugby.
Mate, this is an absolute banger. If you've not seen this, at least go and watch the highlights on YouTube because just the sheer entertainment. I don't think there was a try that wasn't a banger.
Saturday morning, this was how I woke up.
Yeah.
This was on at 8 a.m. UK time, and getting up and watching this immediately was just fantastic.
Because Brazil, we've spoke before about the scrum that they have and everything like that. But, mate, the tries that they were scoring, how wide they were getting the ball. Their captain, Diaz, scored this absolute worldie that I'm just going to talk over a little bit as this unfolds. Look at this. Look how stupid and silly this is. But Hong Kong, the way that they held their composure, came back into the game, kind of the level of patience they had to stay in that game constantly. I absolutely love the look of Tatiri playing 10 for them, who's usually a centre, but moved into 10, and he has such a box of tricks. There's this try, again, that he set up for Matt Worley, who is a prime finisher, who we'll talk about in a moment, I'm sure. A brilliant backline that they're starting to fill out Hong Kong. Really exciting.
Yeah, we talked last week around the fact that the Rugby World Cup is going to have an extra Asian spot. So there is going to be a team alongside Japan, and that is probably going to be Hong Kong. They are the overwhelming favourites for that spot. And the way they performed against Brazil last week, where Brazil just rode into them and kind of walked all over them, it felt a bit like, oh, can we not have an extra South American team? And then you see them turn up and go, actually, no, and they played with this kind of spirit and desire and want to prove a point. If this is the Hong Kong team we're going to get, the Rugby World Cup is going to be better off for having them in it.
100%.
They were superb. As you say, Tatiri at 10, I thought was fantastic. We also got to see the best Barrett in rugby, unequivocally. Axton Barrett at 13, who I thought was possibly player of the match. I thought he was brilliant. And other mention as well to Zach Cinnamon at tight head, which is a brilliant name, especially for a prop. Zach Cinnamon, who came off the bench, and that Brazilian scrum had been driving into them all day. And he won a scrum penalty shortly after coming on. And then from there just held his own, you know? And he's, an experienced player, been around a long time, but to have that kind of, option to bring off the bench to steady things and secure the scrum a bit really helped them come through, because in that second half, they really, really stood up.
Yeah.
And we got a sign of who they are, and they were able to convert that into points. You look at Worley's second try, it's such a, just effort-based try, Yeah. In some ways it's spectacular, but mostly it's just sheer, want to win.
Yeah. I think, as you mentioned, Cinnamon there, players like that are really important when it comes to World Cup time. In these big group games, when you're playing against the big teams, someone like that will be really, really important for them. But yeah, Worley, for me, I think is the star of this Hong Kong team. He's somebody, when I'm looking ahead to, at the World Cup, and you flick them on and you're like, oh, go on Hong Kong playing against, South Africa or something. And it's like, give him the ball. But he is just one of those players with a sheer finishing instinct, and he's so good to watch. So if you've not seen Hong Kong play rugby before, Matt Worley is the name to remember for me.
Yeah, and I'm really excited as we get into the next couple of years to start looking at more of these teams in more detail. It's one of the exciting things about doing this channel is getting to do deep dives into these teams and learn them properly inside out. And the more I see of Hong Kong this weekend, the more I was just like, this is a team I am excited by, rather than looking at, as has been the case in the past, where you've gone like, oh, they're just sort of there, They're the second best Asian team, so they automatically make the repechage. So they automatically now are going to, likely, though, Korea put in a reasonably solid performance against Zimbabwe, who are now unbeaten for the whole year, which is incredible. But yeah, you're probably looking at them as that World Cup spot. But this weekend, I think we saw a different side to them that I'm so excited to see again.
Yeah.
As heading towards that World Cup and towards qualification next year.
I think I'm going to start supporting Hong Kong at some point. I feel like that's on its way.
Oh, I can feel the hype train building.
Yeah.
Yeah, Axton Barrett, 13, mate, the best Barrett. I'm going to ride that joke all the way through for about 6 years. Should we stick with the Saturday morning Tier 2 games and quickly do the UAE v Germany?
Sure.
So again, I
haven't seen this.
No, I watched this game. I watched it live. The UAE did a really fun, really engaging live stream of it. And I want to say good on them, for talking it up, treating it like a big deal. You had presenters from there talking about their chances. They're interviewing both coaches. The German coach has to introduce any of the stars of his team that people might not know. And he said, no, we do not have any superstars, which was great fun. And then they proved their coach wrong, because Germany, again, they might not have superstars, but they really worked for each other. And they were the better team for me the whole way through. And they came out, they won 26 points to 20. And the UAE put up a fight. And I think they had some really solid performances in there. And it puts what Zimbabwe did to them the other week in context. The fact that Germany are, really battling with them. But Germany were clinical. It's the sort of things you'd imagine a stereotypical German team being, in terms of they were clinical, their set piece was very good, they were very structured, and then they just took the points whenever they're on offer. And yeah, I thought Germany looked really strong. They're a very long shot for the World Cup, but looking more 4 years down the line and starting to contest in the coming years and potentially think about that for 2031. And also just like, the World Cup doesn't have to be all and end all of everything, does it?
Sure.
It's good to have more competitive teams. And this Germany team looks like it is, back on the way up. And the UAE, I thought were, a lot of fun. Connor Kennedy, a fullback, looks really good. Is Zimbabwean and had wanted to play for Zimbabwe, but had already played for the UAE. So when called up by Zimbabwe, went, I'm really sorry, guys. I've already played for the UAE. At which point the UAE went, wait, hold on. Why aren't you playing for us? And called him back in because he's great. But he's very good, like multifaceted fullback, can kind of do a bit of everything.
Speaking of the other game that I didn't see this weekend, huge result with the Netherlands beating Chile.
So last week we talked about how Chile absolutely put Canada to the sword. They put, almost 50 points on them. They were dominant, they were rampant, they looked like they'd really kicked on. And then this week was a really weird game. Now, there's no highlights out there. I did watch the match, but 20 minutes in, I was watching it
They erased all trace of it off the internet.
I was watching it on the dodgiest stream on YouTube you've ever seen, where it had, like, in the corners, like, subscribe, and you might love porn. And then in the other corner, it said, like, what if you clicked on a link? And then from about half an hour
Martin
onwards,
Seagren comes back on your screen. Oh, great, that's fine. I'm relieved.
Yeah, then from about half an hour in, a big box came up over the middle saying, to watch game in full screen, click on link. The links didn't work. The links took you to dodgy websites which try to sell you TVs that don't exist. And so I ended up sort of trying to watch this game whilst having another game we'll get onto on at the same time. And my attention did start to waver because there was a big box in the middle I couldn't see past. So your impression of the game is much more limited. I can't tell what's going on at the breakdown at all, but you can sort of broadly get an impression. There was a moment really early on where Chile make a series of breaks, they get onto the 5 metre line, they look like they're going to drive over, and then they kick the points. Mm-hmm. And I think if they kept playing there, they probably would have scored and they probably would have broken the Netherlands' spirits and won the game. And that felt at the turning point for me, because from there, they kick the points, and the Netherlands get downfield, kick a simple penalty given away, like one of those stupid coach killer and discipline penalties, get ahead, and then the Netherlands, a couple of good kicks, they're back down there and they do the same again. And they kick 3 points and they go 6-3 in front, having been completely under the cosh. And for that first half, Chile looked every time they got the ball like they're going to break them down and they were going to get, like they were going to score. But instead, what happened is there was great scramble tackles, great defence by the Netherlands, which we can't show you, I'm afraid, unless you want to put a big box over this. But some great, desperation defence meant instead they were getting up to 5 metre line instead of over the try line.
There's a version of this that I could put over here, but it's blocked on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, Sky New Zealand has got a lot to answer for. But it's probably them.
On a general note then.
Yeah.
Netherlands, that's a huge result for them. Really good to see them competitive. We spoke last year about the fact that at the World Cup, we bumped into a disproportionate amount of Dutch fans who were all so passionate about rugby. Yeah. And we immediately thought, if rugby's that big over there, we're going to see them start to compete soon. Yeah. And obviously they had a bit of a tough Rugby Europe Championship this year. But that is massive.
Some big results and some big, pushed some teams really close.
Yeah, and look, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So nor was Amsterdam. So hopefully that will start to materialise next couple of years.
And the thing that stood out to me was their defence. Their defence was just electric and so fired up and passionate. And Chile had a few chances in the last 10 minutes to win that, where they were going for the line and in the 22 for basically the entire. They were in the 22 from basically 75 minutes onwards, and then the game overran by 3 minutes because they weren't updating the clock because it was on the dodgiest stream in the world. What
was better, their defence or your antivirus defence?
Both similar levels, I think.
Okay.
I haven't
That's promising.
been physically ill yet, and that stream should have given me at least a desperate cold.
Okay.
But yeah, what we did see was just some absolutely phenomenal defence, and particularly the maul defence, because Chile were a few times getting on top, they're not getting more than that metre or two, which they really drove through Canada with. And I just think it was a performance the Netherlands can really build on. Really their effort levels were enormous. I think Chile have got to try not to be too discouraged by this, because I think it's an important part of building as a team, a bit like we talked about with England, is England are going to have odd results against teams that should be below them where they slip up because their eyes are upwards. They're looking at the stars rather than down in the gutter. And so there will be moments in which they're distracted because they're thinking, well, we're better than this team now, so we should be beating them. And they slip over, they only win by a point or they don't win at all. And Chile are at that stage. And what they need to keep doing is focusing on the big prize, which is qualifying for the World Cup, and then pushing once they get there, and pushing up towards challenging with those Tier 1 teams and starting to beat and compete with the likes of Georgia and Japan and Samoa and Wales and Italy, and the kind of smaller Tier 1 or the top of Tier 2. Yeah. And that's where Chile are aiming. And every now and again, they get a result like this. Yeah. And that is the nature of the beast.
It's nothing not been through before.
Yeah. And again, away, he doesn't look it from any of the footage because they put it for some reason on the camera on the side of it. Yeah. But really good crowd out in the Netherlands as well. They had,
I'll take your word for it.
In a fairly decent stadium, they had a huge crowd on one side and completely empty on the other side. So really good to see rugby in the Netherlands continuing to grow. Huge result for them, to beat a World Cup nation. And I'm really excited to do a video on them because we've been talking about this for all year.
We have. Yeah, we really want this.
So I think just before next year's Rugby Europe Championship, we might look to do that.
I'm going to stick with South America.
Yes.
Let's go Uruguay against Japan.
This was one of the best games of the weekend. This was maybe my favourite game of the weekend.
Okay, let's get into it.
So, this was the other game that ended up overlapping with this. I ended up watching primarily because it was fantastic.
I once again had to catch up on this one. Also, Alvarez at 9 for Uruguay. Where the hell did he come from?
So, they just went, I think, have we got someone that looks a bit like Santiago Arata? Physically. And he stood up and he was like, I look a bit like him, and my name's also Santiago A. And they were like, brilliant, you're the next best thing. Brought him in. And he has been a bit of a revelation over the last few weeks.
So
he was brilliant.
I looked at him setting up that try for Diana at the start of the game, and I was like, I had no commentary. And I was like, okay, well, how's Arata been available for this? I didn't realise he was available for these tests. Went and checked it. It's like, oh no, that's somebody completely different. Yep. Somebody completely different. This try as well that he sets up for Bianchi in the second half. The whole round attack for Uruguay is great as well here, where you've got Basso running the inside line off Alvarez here. Instead, they hit the pod, go for the inside tip, again to Diana, who breaks the line. And again, Alvarez so sharp, sees the defender coming inwards and essentially sidesteps him whilst the ball's still on the floor, just by picking it up, attacking that gap and setting it up for Bianchi. He's electric, man.
And when Arata hasn't been playing, they've been generally putting in Karte in 9, who is a centre/scrum half.
Yeah.
And it leads to the whole balance of their team being weirdly off. And he's a very good player. And I like him as a scrum half.
I really like Inciarte, but I feel like he's not all about the pace and dynamism that Arata is. He's more about control, slows things down a little bit.
Alvarez brings them a bit closer to what Arata gives them, you know? And obviously, Santiago Arata is one of the top 5 scrum halves in the world.
Yeah.
And to have a player like that at Uruguay is an enormous get, and you can't replace him. So to have a guy that gets close and looks this good, I thought Manuel Diana was also absolutely brilliant. I thought it was one of his best games in a while. And Uruguay rode most of this game. They were in control for a lot of this game. And Japan's tries all felt quite easy for them, quite simple. And that's the worrying thing for Uruguay. But also, it's almost the encouraging thing, because you could probably, if you're the coach, come in and look at that and go, well, we could have prevented 2 or 3 of these, quite simply. It wasn't they broke this down systematically by being better than us, like they did the All Blacks, like they did England. It's that they just managed to get some big moments, And
also, I feel like the tries looking simple are a product of 3 things, right? One is good skills. That's the general one, which all international teams have, right? The second one is good set moves and so on. For example, there's that one from the line out they do where they pop it in the inside with Shimakawa stood in kind of the receiver channel. Expect a maul, instead he comes through the middle instead. It's a great set move, it's what Japan are known for. But the third one is, of course, what Eddie Jones has really doubled down on, tripled down on, is their ruck speed. Yeah. That feeds the other 2 things, right? You can have your organisation, you can have your good skills, right? They will only be getting good if you're set quicker than the opposition are, right? And that is exactly what they did to Uruguay, is that they ripped them apart with how quickly they could get the ball set. Their groundwork is always flawless. Again, we kind of critiqued Saito a little bit last week. I know he picked up the yellow card this week, but generally in attack, he looked like he is the scrum half that you want, actually. Yeah. In a game like this, on the flip side of last week,
there's a very good drinking game to get you drunk fast. If you drank every time one of the commentators on this game called him Maestro. That was the word they caught onto, the 2 commentators. I think Zach Test coined it. And I thought he had a very, very good game. And I'm taking with the goal kicking at the end made a difference because Japan were scoring tries, but they weren't kicking their points, and they easily could have converted that much sooner. And yet Uruguay still got back in the game and scored that brilliant try from a maul in order to put themselves, the conversion would have put them ahead with about 5 minutes to go, only for it to be disallowed by a grass TMO, an absolute loser, awful guy. I hear he stinks. And then Japan managed to get 2, kickable penalties from there and make the scoreline look, I think, less fair than it would have if it had been a 6-point game, which it was, looking to be a 6-point or a 1-point game in the other direction. And I thought this was a really good step for Uruguay. Would have been the first time they've ever beaten a Tier 1 nation, which would have been enormous. And I really thought they were going to do it, right up until that penalty goes over to make it 8 points.
Yeah.
I really thought they had it coming.
Yeah. I am, weirdly, as much as, I look at this and I kind of cheer for Uruguay a little bit, I'm quite encouraged that Japan won that, though.
Yeah.
Because obviously they've had a real mixed bag in terms of results under Eddie Jones so far. And I really like that he, firstly, kind of invented what we consider a Japanese style of play.
Yes.
And he's doubled down on another area where he can make that the case, And I kind of wanted to be right about that.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean?
But I also know what Eddie Jones is like. And this result ultimately would have mattered more to Uruguay than Japan.
Yeah.
Because he would have forgotten about it in 3 years' time. And it would have got to the World Cup when they inevitably beat Wales, then Scotland, then South Africa, and then go on to lose the final to Chile. And they would have been going like, well, they lost to Uruguay, they lost by 50 points to England and New Zealand, who they absolutely smashed in the round of 16, over 100 points. And, Eddie Jones builds towards World Cups. This Japan team are better than they were, the better than this team in 2012 were, building in 2015. And we look at what they achieved.
Yeah, that's very true.
And it's a really hard one because Japan haven't been good this year.
No.
But the moments in which they have been good, they have been electric in a way I've never seen a team play before. And some of their passages of play against England and New Zealand, they played a style of rugby with an intensity that I think is genuinely undefendable. And if you can keep that up for 80 minutes, could win you a World Cup.
Yeah.
Could legitimately win you a World Cup if you can play that way for 80 minutes. As it was, they could only play it for about 20.
Yeah.
But they're a quarter of the way through this plan.
Yeah, that's
right?
it. They are so at the start of their journey.
Yeah.
Is the thing. And they've had to blood in so many new players.
And so what I imagine this means is they probably have a decent World Cup, but, whether they make a quarter-final again, I don't know. But everything is building towards that.
We can't
and
predict
it's all
it,
about
can we?
accuracy. But you've also got to hope they can keep the mentality up.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is the moment they go behind, they tend to switch off and they can't quite get back into that mindset of playing that way. And I don't know how Eddie Jones does that. He's talked a lot about getting the cap count up and getting those players like Shimakawa and so on who are less experienced, more game time and more experience against teams. And they need, like Italy, to be winning games,
Yeah.
They do need that. So it's really weird to look at Japan. I think we need more data before we do a deep dive on them.
100% we do. Yeah.
I think we probably need at least 2 years. But going into the World Cup, I think they are dark horses to have a really good World Cup at this point. They're the team, but then it's always a case of Eddie Jones teams, but they're the team I look at and I think have the greatest chance of being vastly, vastly different at the World Cup than they are now.
Sure. Yeah.
Because broadly, I think everyone is on a trajectory of some direction. I think
we've just not got a good read on
quite
quite what Japan's is.
Yeah, and Argentina, you never know Argentina year to year, whether they'll crash and fail or anything.
Sure.
But broadly, you can look at everyone and go like, okay, they're heading in a direction,
No one's got Michael Checker in charge of them at time of recording,
Exactly, yeah. That's the Tigers at the World Cup.
Yeah, well, Wales. Anyway, we've got 2.5 games to go.
Yeah.
Here.
So
let's do the 2 first, then the half, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk USA v Tonga.
Yes,
right?
that's exactly what's about to go.
Yes. So at the start of this, you look at this and go like, Tonga are going to cook, man. This try by Paella, I really just love, A, the handling of Tonga, B, like how willing they are to go from like one side to the other, kind of blind side, open side moves, mixing it all up. And again, like the fact that their forwards and their backs really interlink as much as this, and Paella running a hard line to score that in the end. They're all linking up. They're playing lovely rugby. But the USA, once again, same as what we were saying about Hong Kong earlier, the level of kind of experience and composure that they showed, they didn't panic when they went a try or two behind. I really like, Tavita Lopete has been tearing up MLR for a long, long time. And It's taken a long time for him to kind of get the opportunity to step up properly at international level, but I really, really like what he's doing at the moment. Obviously, AJ McGinty is the heartbeat of everything that the USA do.
You know who I really like?
Who?
Corey Daniel.
Yeah?
At 7. I think he's superb.
Yeah.
Comes from a wrestling background, was like all-state wrestling, then like won national titles as well. And then basically his wrestling coach at college happened to know the head of performance for USA Rugby.
Wow.
And just like point him in a direction. And again, the head of performance for USA Rugby was, I forget his name, apologies, kind of went like, oh, interesting. And he was like fast-tracked into the USA Falcons, their second team, brought through, got an MLR contract at Old Glory DC, and then from there has just kicked up gears. And when he looks over a ball, he is immovable, but also the way he carries, the way he gets around the field, his instincts for a guy who only took up rugby like 5 years ago are really strong. It's the way in which once he enters a contact, he is the guy in control of it, whether the other guy's got the more dominant initial shot or not, you know? He's just got this real, like, almost PhD in riding contact. And so that's led to him being really good at the breakdown, you know, and that understanding of the laws has kicked on in the last couple of years, you know, as he started to get caps and game time, you know, his first cap in 2022. But I think, you know, this last year has gone up gears. Then, you know, we're seeing more and more of him with the ball in hand.
Yeah.
And I really like him. I think he's a properly exciting prospect.
I mean, that USA pack generally looked really good. You know, he's playing with the right people. You know, the likes of Greg Peterson, really experienced alongside him, really leading the way there, which is brilliant. Another name that I want to talk about from that game on the Tongan side of things, Lotu Anisi. How good is he? So he's Fine Anise's brother. He is such a good carrier. And every single time he carries, he looks for an offload as a number 8. But it is that Sonny Billish quality. Obviously not the same standard of Sonny Bill's offloading. Nobody is. But it is every single time. It's, I know that I'm a massive threat in the carry. Everybody's going to pincer in on me. How can I make space for somebody else? And I think that that is generally a trait that we're seeing in more number 8s in World Rugby at the moment. You look at like the Ross Vincents of the world who are really starting to dominate. You know, Wallace Atiti, another one.
Morgan Morris.
Yes, Morgan Morris. But I think Lotu Anisi is a real player to look out for in future.
And I think this Tonga team are really interesting because they're not the Tonga team we saw last year. Since big homophobic bum man Kefu has left, they have actually developed a very different game. And they, similar to what we're saying about Japan, are playing with real speed and real intent to attack. And it felt under Kefu like they were playing very basic structures and he was giving them very basic rugby ideas. And his job was, he was a motivator, you know, rather than a tactics guy. And actually them having like more exciting and innovative structures and shapes they're running is really good. And yet they're not paying off for them because the rest of the game isn't there. Physically, I thought they seemed to struggle a bit, you know. They weren't up to it as much, you know, similar to against Romania last week. Maul defence in particular was a bit all over the place. And then there's little moments of composure, right? You look at the intercept try by Ruben de Haas, which is brilliantly taken, but that is the sort of thing you learn from as you're learning to run a structure, you know?
Yeah.
That is like, we've been doing this in training, we've run this pass, we run this pass, we run this pass. There isn't normally an American-South African scrum half standing in the way there when you run it in training. But as you start to run these in match situations, that'll change. Yeah. The worry is, do Tonga get enough time together to be running this? We look what's happened with Samoa this autumn, right? Where Samoa aren't playing any of the games because of financial difficulties. They couldn't fund getting a team over to Europe, which is a horrendous state of affairs. Comes in with the various corruption charges against Samoan Rugby Union. And then also what happened with their coach, who was outed as a paedophile, which is a hell of a story. But are Tonga going to get the game time together? And are we going to see any Samoa-style situations to give them the time in order to develop this way, right? If they were a team like Japan even, never mind England or New Zealand, I think they probably have the time to be really, really good by the next World Cup.
Yeah.
As it is, I don't know whether they're going to have, I really hope they will have the raw time together. I think the ceiling for this Tonga team is higher than the last few, higher than it has been for about a decade.
Yeah, and they've got some big firepower names to come back in.
That's it. Once you bring a lot of those names back in.
Like Salesi Piatau when he's coming back in. Speaking of Pacific Islands then, right, there's one more big game to talk about and then we're going to do a little one at the end.
From Paella to Paella.
Indeed. Very good. Very good. I'll have to visually put up a spelling thing there to make that work. But Fiji España.
Yeah.
Go.
Mate, so this was a great occasion. You had a stadium with what is really encouraging to hear. Like, one of the best things about this game is this wasn't a record crowd for Spain.
Wow.
You know? And yet they had some 25 to 30,000 people packed into the stadium, really strong atmosphere. They were really up for it. They were loving it. And then the world's slowest TMO happened. And this game kept being interrupted by a TMO who was stepping in and going, chick, I am considering showing you a tackle. There's a chance it might be foul play. We're going to need to see it 16 times. And it took a lot of the air out the room. However, this Spain team did their absolute best to re-engage people and get that crowd really fired up. And it didn't help that, you know, the most spectacular try they would have scored ended up being a penalty try.
Oh my God, I love this. Like, it's a great moment in the game, to be honest. There's a moment of drama with Frank Lomani tapping it out. And like Tani Bai's break here, that TMO drama being the highlight of the game. Yeah. And I don't mean that as like a downer on the game, because it was great.
They also, I think partly because it would have been in English, weren't playing it back into the stadium. Right, so there was a long TMO drama where they were talking about this and going back and forth with a crowd who mostly aren't rugby fans. You know, casuals have been brought in from other sports and, you know, the area. It's a difficult law to describe. You know, I had fans who are rugby fans watching it going like, what's going on here? There are some really, really standout players in this Spain team. They have a hell of a pack on their hands. You throw them into that Rugby World Cup qualification mix. Really, really exciting, really, really promising.
Similar thing to what we were saying about Trackers with Brazil last week, you know. The fact that they've now got a 50-plus metre goal kicker in there, it shocked Fiji for sure. Yeah. Like they were shell-shocked after that. Again, when it comes to qualification, people will pay for that.
Yeah. This was obviously a weaker Fijian team. It was somewhere between the team that played Wales and the team that played Scotland. Stronger than the team that played Scotland, not as strong as the one that played Wales. And yet they were posed, I think, a similar level of challenge to Wales as by Spain.
But it was a weakened team for sure, but like the players they had coming in were still good. They had Sorelli Mangala playing at 13, which isn't his usual position. Slid, Naif Alevu into the 12 channel, which is not a balanced backline whatsoever.
No.
But it's bloody good.
It's Fiji. What do you want?
Yeah.
You want that. You want that. You want the quickest lads possible.
Like when you watch this back, you kind of have moments where, you know, Spain will do something like they'll put a kick in, you go, that's a brilliant kick.
Yeah.
And then, that's Uita Vainingolo that they've got a mark there, who has literally like the highest defenders beaten percentage in existence. You know, it's a really difficult team to defend when you're into the last 20 minutes of the game, and that's essentially the story.
That's
of the
where
day
it went down to
for Spain. You know, they completely physically matched them for a long enough time.
Once you've been doing that for 80 minutes, you can't keep that up.
That Naif Alevu try near the end.
Yeah,
it's like if you're playing against a team who can do that, they deserve to win.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, they deserve to win because they are that good a rugby team.
Spain went into half-time ahead, and that is an enormous thing to take from this, you know, to say that they can take a team who beat Wales the week beforehand to, 60-odd minutes.
Not that it's a high bar, but yes.
No, but you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Wales are still, a team that were in the World Cup quarterfinals 12 months ago.
Yes.
There are players who've played to the top end of the game there.
Yeah.
And you've got a team that's beaten them, and I know everyone's doing that, and Spain v Wales would be a really interesting game at the minute.
It would. I'd love to see
from a neutral point of view.
Spain, you've got to call them out on Twitter. That's how you do it.
That's how it works. One of the big stories of rugby the last 2 years is Spain and the Netherlands quietly building a fan base and quietly building competitive teams. And at some point, I think they, like Brazil and possibly like Paraguay, though Paraguay have gone a bit quiet of late, are going to burst in the way Chile did, in the way Portugal did. And I think that's coming sooner rather than later. I think there's a very good chance that this Spain team take games like this, which are vital, which are so important for them building, and use them to start winning those games for qualification next year. I'm really excited we have this channel, this opportunity, because qualification next year is going to be so exciting. And it overlaps with the Six Nations, so we haven't really been able to cover it normally. And this gives us the chance to do that. And I want to talk about this every week, because it is one of the most exciting things happening in the game in the minute is Spain getting a 25,000 plus crowd in to watch them push Fiji, lead Fiji at half time in an entertaining game with an entertaining team, and I'm so excited by where we can go.
I hope that growth gets less quiet as time goes on, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have a half left to go. You might wonder what I meant by that. So the last game that we've not covered is Australia versus Redacted, right? And we're not going to talk about Redacted because we already did that.
We did 40 minutes on them.
Yeah, so we're not going to talk about them whatsoever. We're going to talk about Australia playing at the Principality Stadium and chucking a ball around.
And it's funny because they could have played against no one, it would have been the same result.
Would have been the same result. It's easy to get down on how shit the other team were, right?
Yeah.
But we do need to give so much credit to Australia. Yeah. Naturally, we have a bias in terms of who we look at, you know, because of who we've supported. Look, we've hyped up so many other players from other teams, right? Like, Nick Frost ran in a 50-metre try.
Yeah.
How good is that?
Yeah. That kid has serious wheels. Like, I think he's been on Moments of the Year videos twice running in 50-metre plus tries. You look at them taking Jeremy Williams out, who was so good at Twickenham, and bringing in Will Skelton, and then the big change in Osama Karevi coming in for Sualili. It's that boldness by Joe Schmidt combined with this squad. You know, there was something that Matt Gitto said recently, that the big takeaway for him from these 2 weeks is all the players are just smiling all the time. And you watch training footage and they look like they're having a great time. And you compare that to a year ago when obviously that was not the case under Eddie Jones. But what we're seeing is Joe Schmidt really look at both this squad he's got and also his own methods and techniques and tactics. And he's changed himself.
Yeah.
You know, he is running different systems, different plans, and now clearly different methodologies in order to get the most out of the players he has. You know, and I think Australia are playing much looser than any Joe Schmidt team I've ever seen before. Yeah. You know, they're playing with much less structure, and yet it's also there and instilled in them in case they want to go back to it.
Yeah,
you know,
I love
and
that.
And we saw over the summer, over the Rugby Championship, them being in these situations where they were playing clearly far more rigid than Schmidt intended them to ultimately play, because he wants them to know that so they can go back to it, right? And you look at that last try at Twickenham, obviously a different game. But that comes from them playing those structures so they can then open it up when that comes in.
It does all translate, doesn't it? Yeah.
That kind of last try became the model for the whole 80 minutes in Cardiff, you know, where they were playing this really like rigid rugby, this really like systematic rugby until they weren't. Yeah. And the moment they went, okay, they changed completely. And you look at the first Tom Wright try, right? And how that is them being incredibly reactive to a situation they've opened up through playing percentages, through playing like regular, break them down slowly over the phases, Joe Schmidt rugby.
Both Tom Wright tries, you say that.
Yeah. Then the second Tom Wright try has a bit of like a breakaway element of like where he was giving up to it.
Yeah.
But like, it's just like superb across the board.
Yeah.
And it's so good to watch.
I love it because, again, you think it's not what I expected Joe Schmidt to bring to this Wallabies team, but it just makes so much sense. But you look at his Leinster team and you look at his Ireland team and to an extent his All Blacks team where he was attack coach, right? And you look at it and you think, right, we'll cut down a little bit on offloads, right? We will get some go forwards, and only when there is loads of go forwards and there's loads of space out there, then we'll think about taking a risk, right? Whereas with this Australia team, it's like everyone's expressing themselves.
Yeah.
Everyone is doing the thing that makes them a good rugby player, right? And whether that is, you know, Sualili doing overhead passes, you know, Tom Wright flicking it behind his back and running from his own 22 and so on, right? Every great Australia team has had at least a bit of that to them. Clearly, it's just one of the things that characterises them as a rugby nation, right? It's just something you can't explain. It just is what is their identity. And it really, really works. And yeah, I think we learned a little bit at the Allianz Twickenham Stadium that is what this Wallabies team needs a little bit. And in Cardiff, I just feel like they really like doubled down on that again, that they just lent everything into that. As you say, we will break them down a bit and then let's just play ball.
And that's the thing about this team, right? This is the thing that's most exciting about them, is, as we said, they are the Joe Schmidt Wallabies. 9 letters in Joe Schmidt, 8 letters in Wallabies, and that is the balance of the team, right? They are 9 parts Joe Schmidt and 8 parts traditional Australian rugby. They created this like thing completely out of nowhere that you thought was impossible, because you thought Joe Schmidt coming in would lead to them playing that far more rigid rugby. And instead, he's just given them the option to break it off. And it was a vintage performance of them attacking. Like, it's the most points they've ever scored in Cardiff, which is extraordinary considering some of the Australian teams that have come in past.
Yeah.
And yet this one is just like discovering themselves. That Twickenham game is going to be one of the moments where this Australian team kicks off to do anything, be it, you know, beating the Lions, be it performing in a World Cup, be it winning the Bledisloe, which is not a just thing, you know, or be it just winning a game against the Springboks or, you know, whoever down the next few years. No matter what they do, you'll point to the Twickenham game as the moment they learn to believe in themselves and believe in their game plan and their style and that kind of style of adventure we talked about in the video last week. But I think you point to this Cardiff game as the moment it became who they are.
Yeah.
You know? And this felt like a team kicking up levels, kicking up gears, and becoming themselves.
Yeah, and I feel like they're the next team that could potentially play like a Barbarians team. That people will say like, hang on, you never switch off against these boys, right? And there's a lot of chat that was justifiable a couple of weeks ago around like the Lions tour and like, are they going to be competitive there? And I get it, right? But at the moment, I just think let's just focus on how good are they?
Yeah.
You know, let's just enjoy watching them. Because, again, like last year we learned you can't really take for granted that Australia are always going to be a brilliant rugby team, right? And firstly, it's great to see them back. But secondly, as you say, I've scarcely seen an international team look like they're enjoying themselves more. Yeah. And if I remove the fact that I was supporting the other team in that game, right, when you see a team chucking the ball around like that, like how fun is it to watch?
Yeah, exactly. Like this team had about 10 days together before their first game under Schmidt. He knew nothing about it. He said it was the most underprepared he's ever been in his entire career. And then, by this point, now that they're 10 games in, they're a completely different prospect.
Yeah.
And it's taken him 10 games, which in a club scenario is absolutely nothing. In an international scenario, it's a year. But that's all it's taken him to get him into this situation, you know, where they're a proper team again. And that is the Joe Schmidt promise, isn't it? You know, 10 games or your money back. Yeah. 10 games and you will look like a competent, exciting international team. And they now play Scotland. And this is maybe the game this weekend I'm looking forward to most. Even though France are playing Argentina, what promises to be the most batshit game of the year. I would normally in this fixture support Scotland and cheer for Scotland. I'm going to be cheering for Australia. I want this Grand Slam to happen. It'd be such a brilliant way of setting up the Lions tour, but most importantly, it would be one of the great moments in rugby history, I think. Like 40 years to the year
a redemption arc.
Yeah. Going on from having, you know, a Australian team that had been underperforming and all over the place coming into, you know, the 84 tour. And then they arrive and they beat those teams with a young side and they set up pretty much like 30 years of being fantastic. Then after a decade of them not quite being there since the 2015 World Cup final, followed by the worst year in their history, to then turn it around and produce this, you know. Last year they lost 40 points to 6 to Wales. We were there, we remember it very fondly. I watched the highlights every night before I go to sleep. And now they're turning it around in this fashion and winning by an even greater margin. You know, from a neutral, from an Australian point of view, how good?
You've come a long way since you got dominated by Nick Tompkins.